This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Well, good evening and welcome to the show. Coming up tonight, the left throw another hurdle at Donald Trump as Illinois becomes the latest state to disqualify him from their ballot. Plus, Shane Gillis returns to Saturday Night Live in fine form. Will this finally see SNL depart from their lefty political so-called comedy? And Joe Biden's doctor somehow declares him fit for office after his annual physical health exam this week. But first, illegal immigration is shaping up to be the big plank in the Republican Party platform this year, and not without reason. Depending on how you count them, somewhere between 7 and 10 million illegals have flooded into the United States since Joe Biden took office. While some are no doubt genuinely fleeing persecution and filing legitimate refugee claims, the fact is that as the weeks and months go by, the truth becomes clear. This flood is mostly made up of economic migrants, with a large number of gang members, criminals, cartel types, and people on terror watch lists, as well as a suspicious number of single military-aged Chinese males. The past month has seen a number of awful crimes allegedly committed by people who have come across through this surge, including the deaths of a toddler and a female college student, Laken Riley, who was innocently out for a run when she was set upon and apparently bashed to death for no good reason. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that case later in the show, but right now, I want to inoculate everyone who is watching against any claims from the Biden administration that they are going to make over the coming months, saying that they have been tough on borders. Because that is completely wrong. Joe Biden, the Democrats, have been lax from the beginning. I want to take you back to 2020 so you can see the scope of the Biden deception. Here is Joe Biden running for president 4 years ago, saying that he would not detain illegal migrants.
How exactly would you detain immigrants, if at all, in a Biden administration?
The way we did when we reformed the system with the DACA, I would not retain them behind bars. They show up. No, here's what they do. They show up. Sometimes you have an ankle bracelet, you set a hearing.
At the time, he also campaigned against deporting illegals.
Nobody, and some of you are going to get mad at me with this, but nobody is going to be deported in my first 100 days until we get through the point that we find out the only rationale for deportation will be whether or not you've committed a felony while in the country.
Now, even the idea of deporting felons is now controversial among Democrats, but Joe Biden also said that illegal immigration made America strong.
On day one, I'm going to send immigration legislation reform to the Congress to provide a roadmap to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants and so much that make up so much of our communities and make us so strong.
Now, I accept that this issue wasn't as big in 2020 as it is now. Remember that back then we were all worried about COVID and Black Lives Matter riots and what we now know to be the utterly bogus Russian hoax that saw American intelligence agencies get around the law on spying against citizens by using other countries' letter agencies to spy on Donald Trump. So back then, we weren't paying all that much attention to the southern border because we thought, how bad could it get? Well, now we know. From day one, Joe Biden acted to repeal Donald Trump's tough border policies. Not long after they took office, Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas bragged about what they had done.
And I'd like to understand from you what Trump-era immigration policies have been banned, ended, reversed, and if any investigations are underway by you.
So we have rescinded so many Trump immigration policies, it would take so much time to list them.
And of course, predictable tragedy has ensued. Millions of illegals have poured in. So-called sanctuary cities are groaning under the weight of their compassionate policies. And countless American citizens have become the victims of terrible crimes that should not have occurred. Brandon Judd, head of the Border Patrol Union, says that the entire outcome has been to open the floodgates.
Everything changed under President Biden. The way we patrol the border, our operations have changed. The way we vet people has changed. The way we process people through the system has changed. Everything that we do has changed under this administration. And it's not about enforcement. It's about getting people into this country as quickly as they possibly can.
And how has that worked out? Well, this report from December tells you everything you need to know. Venezuela is now the safest it has been in 2 decades because all of its criminals have headed north to the United States. So any rational person is going to be asking yourself, why? Why would Biden and the Democrats want to open the borders and flood the country with non-citizens, many of them criminals? Well, I've dug back into the archives again to the 2020 campaign, and I think I've found the answer.
Part of what I'm going to send to the United States Congress is a total immigration bill to provide a pathway to citizenship for undocumented people in the United States of America. It makes no sense for us not to do that.
Pathway to citizenship. Did you get that? Import millions of new Americans illegally, and then wave a wand and turn them into Democratic voters for life. Shame about all the crime, dislocation, depressed wages, everything else along the way. But never mind. For a Democrat, anything is better than the Republicans ever holding power again. Joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bardney Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, thanks so much for joining us on the show. Huge news out of the Supreme Court this week, which has decided to rule on Donald Trump's claim that he has immunity from prosecution on charges that he plotted to overturn the 2020 election. What does this mean? How does it go? And if the court grants Trump immunity, will this lead to a new effort to delegitimize the court by the left?
Yes to all of the above, James. Let's sort of walk through what might happen. The court could say that Trump is immune from any sorts of claims. That would essentially be a dismissal of the action against him in Washington, D.C. related to January 6th, and likely lead to a dismissal of the actions against him in the state of Georgia. And for that reason would lead to efforts by the left to further delegitimize the Supreme Court. If, however, they go the other way, and it's likely they will, most legal scholars I've talked to, and I used to practice law a long time ago, don't see how the president really makes a claim here for total immunity. So if the court goes the other way and says that Trump is not immune, there's still a huge benefit to Trump in that this delays the trial. There's a really, really good chance now that this trial might not take place. I'm talking now about the January 6th federal criminal action might not take place until right before or right after the November 2024 general election. And it might not actually be finished until after the election. So in theory, you could have Donald Trump in trial on election day, winning that night, and then found guilty a week later, which just leads down the road to a whole bunch of bizarre sort of outcomes.
Well, it does, but also it does when you put it in the bigger context of the other Trump legal issues. You know, the Georgia case against him, well, that's become a whole mess. Other cases are being delayed and likely not happening until after the election as well. Has the lawfare strategy of the left to get Trump off the ballot or keep him, from running or winning, is that starting to fall apart here?
No, it's still quite successful. Here's what's happening is that, yes, Trump is going to win the cases to allow him to stay on the ballot. There's no way any court ultimately will kick him off of the ballot. So he'll win that battle. And he's winning in sort of the court of public opinion. Keep in mind, he was actually doing worse in polls before all this lawfare started. So that message that he's made very effectively, that is, look what they're doing to me. If they can do it to me, imagine what they can do to you. Elect me and I'll make sure that doesn't happen. That continues to sell. Here's the one place it's hurting him. It's hurting him with money. It absolutely is. It's draining his campaign. Joe Biden has almost twice as much money saved up for the general election right now as Donald Trump does. So at that particular very critical part of the American political process, it is working, and it is sapping funds that Donald Trump could otherwise use to run against Joe Biden.
But Mick, back to what you just said there about how people are reacting to this. Would you say that the left, that the Democrats have made a real mistake in essentially building Trump up into this huge monster? Because if they just treated him like a normal candidate, that he probably wouldn't wind up getting all of this attention and support that he's getting from being able to say he's being persecuted.
Yeah, but they can't do that, James. Trump derangement syndrome is absolutely real. Donald Trump just does something to the left that no other Republican, conservative, right-leaning politician has done in my lifetime. They cannot help themselves. Keep in mind that every time they have what they perceive to be a win against him in court, they go home to their cocktail parties in Washington, D.C. and Manhattan and high five and celebrate, and he goes up 2 and 3 points in the polls. It's just the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, but the left can't help themselves.
Well, it is pretty entertaining, though. I mean, but let's look at this other issue, too. Illinois, they've taken him off the primary ballot. How big a threat is this?
None, practically none. The judge actually even entered that finding, stayed her own finding pending appeal, because I think she knows it'll probably it'll be overturned. It's just for right now, at least the primary ballot. Nobody really cares about the Republican primary in Illinois. Trump is going to win anyway. He's going to win the nomination before the Illinois primary comes around. In any event, keep in mind, he might lock it up as early as a week from Tuesday. So it is, again, one of those things. Is it much ado about nothing? Maybe. Does it help Trump? Probably. Can the left help themselves? No, they cannot.
Indeed. Mick, finally, I want to talk about a more serious story here. The death of 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley in Georgia at the hands of somebody who was allegedly in the country illegally and had been arrested a number of times before this crime and was let free by authorities over and over again. I want to play a little clip here. The mayor of Athens, Georgia, where this happened, refused to accept that America's flippant immigration policies had anything to do with this. But people weren't happy about this. Have a look at this.
I caution against conflating immigration and crime. The data demonstrates that the two are not connected. And you had that notion metastasizing in places like Charlottesville.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has just been down at the border. Here's what he had to say a little while ago.
Every time you hear the term migrant crime, you know where that comes from. Allowing thousands and thousands and actually millions and millions of people to come. Could be 15 million, could be 18 million by the time he gets out of office.
Now, the senseless death of this nursing student has really captured, I think, a lot of people's attention here. Is Donald Trump and other Republicans really on a big winner with the southern border crisis?
They are, James. It's ordinarily in this country, the southern border immigration, more specifically illegal immigration, is the type of thing that Republican candidates use to get out their base, their Republican voters. Again, we do not have mandatory voting in this country, so we're always looking for things that drive people to the polls. Ordinarily, this is a right-wing issue. It's not anymore. It has become a bipartisan issue. It's become an issue in many of the blue left-leaning states. And this terrible crime in Georgia has been a really, really big deal. Keep in mind, even the left-leaning press actually covered this story pretty heavily the first couple of days, and then they stopped after they found out what it was doing politically. Georgia is a critical swing state. So what you're talking about now is a terrible crime linked directly to an illegal immigrant in a swing state. This is going to have dramatic political implications, not just in the presidential election, but all the way down the ballot. Crime linked to illegal immigration is going to be perhaps the biggest issue in the 2024 election, eclipsing, for the first time again in my adult lifetime, eclipsing the economy, eclipsing jobs, eclipsing inflation. This looks to be becoming the big issue of this election cycle.
That's right, Mick, and I think I've just seen a CNN poll which suggests that it is, in fact, many voters' #1 issue. Mick, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll see you next week on the U.S. Report. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, James.
Well, let's head overseas now to talk to our resident foreign policy expert, senior fellow and director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute, Michael Doran. Michael, thanks for joining me tonight. So many big doings in foreign policy this week, but while he talks a big game on the subject, I don't think we can say Joe Biden is really a hands-on foreign policy president in the mold of, say, Richard Nixon. Here he was talking about a potential ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Have a listen to this.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Yeah, so he's just hearing things from his national security advisor, and now he's walking it back.
Hope springs eternal. I was on the telephone with the people in the region. I'm still, probably not by Monday, but I'm hopeful.
Michael, tell us what is happening here with the U.S. and their involvement in this potential ceasefire deal. How has this been complicated by the events with that aid delivery in Gaza, and there was a number of deaths that happened there? And is Joe Biden just not on the ball in terms of actually being hands-on with trying to sculpt some sort of peace deal in the way the previous U.S. presidents have during previous crises in the Middle East?
Well, James, thanks for having me. My interpretation here is not so much that Biden is out of it on this question, but rather that domestic politics are really starting to have an impact on all the foreign policy messaging. He is playing to his progressive base, which doesn't like the war in Gaza, doesn't like the support for Israel, wants to see greater support for the Palestinians and for a ceasefire. And so he's eager to show that he's pushing for a ceasefire and focused on that. That's just the domestic politics speaking there.
And I mean, how much of this then has to do with states like Michigan? We saw a fascinating thing happen in Michigan, which has a large Arab American population earlier this week. Their uncommitted vote, though, and there was a big push to have an uncommitted vote by Democrats to say, hey, we're not happy with you. That barely increased from the last time a Democrat president was running for election again in 2012 to 2024, from 10.69% last time to just 13%. How much is this issue electorally going to move the needle, though? I mean, even despite those concerns.
I think it's a very serious issue for for Biden. What he's afraid of, it can come down to the politics in this country as well as I do, or better. And it can come down to a very small number of votes in key states. And they're very concerned that in Wayne County, which has a large Arab American population, that a lot of the voters won't even come to the polls in November. That's what when they see those uncommitted ones in the primaries, that's what they're worried about. They want to make sure that they get out the vote in November. And so Biden is playing to them. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
Yeah, so does this create then another problem? Because, of course, more broadly outside some of these counties and some of these states, there still remains overwhelming U.S. support for Israel. There was a Harvard-Harris poll that said 81% of Americans back Israel over Hamas, 69% approved of Israel trying to avoid civilian casualties. 64% say a ceasefire should only happen after Hamas is removed and all hostages are freed. The question then is, are the Democrats now letting themselves be hijacked, so to speak, by a hard left group and by the pro-Islamist wing of the party?
Well, President Biden is trying to thread the needle, and he's developed a package of policies that appeal to both wings of the party. Let's call it the pro-Israel wing of the party and the anti-Israel wing. For the pro-Israel side, he's saying that he has consistently supported Israel in the fight against Hamas. He has avoided the calls for an immediate ceasefire coming from the progressive left. And to the progressive left, he's saying, I'm working very hard to get a ceasefire now. And the ceasefire that he's working on is one that it'll be in the context of a exchange of the hostages that Hamas took for Palestinians who are incarcerated in Israeli jails. And so prisoner for hostages swap that the Israeli government will accept. so he won't be seen from the pro-Israel side as having forced Israel to do something it doesn't want to do.
And something we haven't heard a lot about in the press, but I know is still going on. Where are things up to now in the Red Sea and with the Houthis? I've noted that there have been some tankers which have been hit and sunk. The communications cables are now under threat there. How much of a threat is this spilling back over again? It seems to have calmed down in the press, but has it calmed down in reality?
Well, the ships are not going. The huge percentage of the global shipping that normally goes through the Suez Canal is not going through. The United States has, and its coalition partners, who are not very large, have not deterred the Houthis. They have taken a policy of purely defensive reaction to the Houthis. That is, when they see the Houthis are setting up to attack or have already attacked, they will carry out countermeasures. They've carried out some countermeasures against stockpiles of weapons, but they won't carry out any offensive countermeasures that might truly deter the Houthis. And I mean targeting Houthi leadership or targeting the Iranian liaison officers with the Houthis. The coalition is not engaging in that, and if they don't do that, they won't deter the Houthis. They're certainly not thinking of the next level up, which is to arm Yemenis on the ground, anti-Houthi Yemenis on the ground. Nothing like that's happening.
And finally, just if you could take us quickly through the big foreign policy differences between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We keep talking about Joe Biden's foreign policy, but what would you expect would change on issues such as this if Donald Trump were to resume power in November?
Well, I think this is precisely the kind of issue where we would see something different. And we have something to go by because we have the behavior of Trump when his 4 years in office. If we compare his 4 years in office to Biden's 3 years, we see that he was willing to carry out offensive countermeasures against groups like the Houthis, to kill Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force of the IRGC, the Iranian group that was arming, training, and equipping all of these militias across the Arab world. Trump, he gets called by the mainstream media and in the international media as an isolationist. I think we saw that he's not isolationist. He wants allies to do more. He will actually become engaged in the world. He's not afraid to carry out military action. He doesn't want to get involved in new wars, but he will act to deter bad actors. And I think that's the big difference, is that there's something in the DNA of the Biden administration and of the Democratic Party today that is really not just against, it's not just anti-war, it's anti-deterrence. That's the difference.
Mike Doran, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time. Mike Doran from the Hudson Institute. Now, we're going to be right back with author and media expert Stephen Krakauer to take a deep dive into all the ways the press is covering for Joe Biden. And we're going to look at an SNL skit that is actually funny. But before we do that, check out this genius, Joy Reid. Now, you may know her from The View, which I think is the singularly stupidest show in America. Here she is failing to understand some very basic facts of life and population and demography and destiny.
The United States has a population of north of 327 million people. Why do we need more kids?
Why does society need more young people? More kids? Great question, Joy. Really deep. And we'll just wait while you ponder it and come up with an answer. Media Shenanigans with Steve Krakauer, next. Welcome back to the program. Stephen Krakauer joins us in a moment to talk about the finger-snapping madness at the New York Times. But speaking of madness, this footage has just come in of MSNBC's Rachel Maddow having a full-on meltdown. Why? Because she thinks that if Donald Trump wins the presidency in November, but loses his immunity case in the Supreme Court, he is going to stay in office past 2028 and declare himself president for life. Yeah, right? See if you can follow along with this bonkers logic. Have a look.
The conclusion that we can arrive at now, based on what they have done without having to wait for the ruling, is that they are ensuring that Trump will not face trial. And when they inevitably rule that presidents aren't immune from prosecution after they leave office, what that will tell Donald Trump, if by then he is president, is that he can never leave the office of the presidency.
Right.
And if he is voted out in 2028, he cannot leave office, and he is willing to he is welcome to commit any crimes he wants to, as long as he is still president, in order to ignore the result of that election and stay in power for life, because otherwise he's going to go to prison when he gets out.
What can you say to that? I mean, what an absolutely unbelievable grift this has become for the snake oil selling traveling preachers of the left. And they've got only one act left, which is to terrify people about Trump. If you listen to Maddow and the MSNBC people, everything's a disaster. If Trump wins his immunity case, it's the end of the world. He loses the case, it's just as bad. There's no other word for it. These people are charlatans. Now, I'm pleased to welcome back one of my all-time favorite guests on the U.S. Report. He's one of the smartest observers of the problems in the U.S. media, its biases and groupthink, and he recently wrote a great book I've talked about here before that's just been re-released called Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. Steve Krakauer joins me now. Steve, welcome to the program. I want to open things up with this incredible story from The Atlantic magazine by Adam Rubenstein. He was an ex-opinion editor at the New York Times, and he talked about his experience at the paper. If you wrote this in a comedy skit, your bosses would tell you to wind it back. And I want to read you this little bit here because it's amazing. He writes that on one of my first days at the New York Times, I went to an orientation with more than a dozen other new hires. We had to do an icebreaker, pick a starburst out of a jar, and then answer a question. My starburst was pink, I believe, and so I had to answer the pink prompt, which had me respond with my favorite sandwich. I blurted out, "The spicy chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A," and considered the ice broken. But then the HR representative leading the orientation chided me. "We don't do that here. They hate gay people." People started snapping their fingers in acclamation. I hadn't been thinking about the fact that Chick-fil-A was transgressive in liberal circles. I said, "Not the politics, the chicken." But it was too late. I sat down, ashamed. Stephen Krakauer, as an illustration of the bubble that the American left-wing corporate media have become, well, I mean, it's hard to find a better example of that, is it?
Oh, it's perfect. It's just a perfect encapsulation of the craziness of American newsrooms these days. I know Adam a little bit. I also actually write about one of the incidents that Adam, writes about in that piece, which is when he got pushed out of the New York Times over the Tom Cotton op-ed. I spend a lot of time in my book Uncovered on this because I think it was a hugely consequential moment. This is when, and I tell stories in there, people are on the record, former New York Times employees, that there were employees at the New York Times who were crying on Zoom meetings because their friends were mad at them because they worked for the New York Times, this horrible paper that dared to publish a column by a United States Senator, Tom Cotton. I mean, it's completely insane, but this is what we were dealing with then, and I think, unfortunately, to a degree now. And I think there's another element to this, because it's not just that piece, which is just perfect, but also the reaction to it. The amount of journalists, including journalists like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's won lots of awards, who works at the New York Times, in theory, although she never really writes for them anymore, saying that this is false. This didn't happen, she said. And then The Atlantic says, oh no, everything was fact-checked, including this anecdote. And they still say, she demands to see the fact-check document. I mean, there's Chick-fil-A truthers is what people are talking about. An absolute insane scenario. And it just gives you an idea. This happened in 2019. In 2020 was the Tom Cotton op-ed. We're in 2024. Nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse.
Well, I mean, the New York Times sets so much of the agenda for the rest of the U.S. media, but this is a real problem because, you know, you talk in your book about how the kids have basically taken over in these newsrooms. The adults feel like they're kind of not in charge anymore. But there's a moment where you talk about how objective facts among these journalists are now considered markers of white privilege. Where does all of this come from, and how difficult is it going to make actually getting real news about the 2024 campaign from the American press?
It's going to make it very difficult. Yeah, you touch on one of the quotes that actually is a former New York Times journalist, Amy Chozick, who went on the record with me in the book. Everyone who's in the book is on the record, and I appreciate them putting their name to it because it takes some courage to do that. But she said there's a generation of young journalists who believe that objectivity is akin to white supremacy, which is an insane thing to think. But I think she's absolutely right. And this goes to the problem, because it's not just enough that there are journalists out there, and certainly people on the left, who believe that there are bad opinions on the right or even stupid opinions. No, these are dangerous opinions. And when you start putting that out there, that certain points of view are not just bad, but dangerous, that they need to be suppressed, that there's this anti-speech activism in the media, you are going to get a reduction in the amount of facts that are being put out there. That's just inevitable. And so that's really where we're at right now. It's a huge problem. And I frankly think there are people out there, including in the corporate media who I talk to, that believe that there is a problem. But this is not getting fixed until Donald Trump is off the main stage. So it's not getting fixed until 2025 at the earliest, and certainly potentially until 2029.
Well, and you talk about dangerous facts and bad facts and things that shouldn't be talked about. MSNBC analyst Claire McCaskill has said that the media should stop fact-checking Joe Biden. Have a look at this.
I move that every newspaper in America quits doing any fact checks on Joe Biden.
She's not some fresh-faced kid just out of Columbia J School. She's been around for a while, and this is now the attitude even with some senior journalists.
Absolutely. And look, Claire McCaskill, former United States Senator, partisans in this country on the left and frankly on the right, I get that they don't understand the way journalism is supposed to work, that there's a freedom of speech, that we want more voices, not less out there, that we want a free flow exchange of ideas. The more information, the better. But let me tell you something. A lot of people who are journalists these days agree with Claire McCaskill, and you're right. It's not just the young kids, although the young kids have more power than young kids in journalism ever had before in today's social media era. No, there are a lot of people in those newsrooms, including people who she was talking to on that Morning Joe program when she said this, who completely agree with her, that we need to stop telling the truth about Joe Biden. Or, you know, we saw this with the Herb report, the HUR report here with the special counsel. How dare he say the truth about what Joe Biden said in those private sessions when he couldn't remember the year that his son died? How dare they say that? Because what if that influences the way people think about it? I mean, this is the level we're at right now, and it's not just coming from partisans like Claire McCaskill. It's coming from the media themselves, and that's a huge problem.
And Stephen, before I let you go, there was an amazing thing happened the other day. SNL, Saturday Night Live, made fun of Trump, but that's not the news because they do that all the time. But they actually did it in a funny way. Let's have a little look at this clip from their upcoming hit film, White Men Can't Trump.
But that's all about to change.
Gordon, thought you could use these. Donald J. Trump? Whoa, Trump never surrender sneakers? Awesome. I'm open.
And Gordon Dwyer's about to find out that winning
Come on, man, how'd you miss that?
is a state of mind.
I didn't miss. It went in.
So you're saying these Trump shoes made you good at basketball?
No, they give me the power to say I'm good at basketball and then double down on that until people actually start to believe it.
Now he gets whatever he wants.
Mr. Mitchell, everybody's saying I should have your office because my cubicle is a disaster right now.
Well, can I have a minute to gather my things?
Bye-bye.
White men can Trump.
Oh, you got new shoes too? Yeah, Air Biden's. Now pass me the rock. Here we go. Uh-oh.
Now, very quickly, we don't have a lot of time, but you said that this is significant because it signals that they're changing tone, and the fact that they brought Shane Gillis back to do this is important. Very quickly, Stephen Krakauer, just tell us about that.
Yeah, Shane Gillis, who got fired for some offensive comments he made years ago, he brought him back as host. And you're right, yeah, this is a funny sketch. It's not a pro-Trump sketch, but it's funny. And you compare it to the way the show started, but really you could look at any time. There's so lack of nuance and so lack of comedy, frankly, because they're so partisan. Shane Gillis jumps in there and is actually funny. It's a welcome change. I don't think we're going to see it forever, though.
Well, that's all right. Anyway, thank you so much, Stephen Krakauer, for your time, author of Uncovered. Really appreciate it. Now, before we go, in a moment, John Fund is going to bring us the latest on the mysterious state of Joe Biden's health. And is the president really taking a cognitive test every day? But first, check out this little bit of news Kamala Harris just dropped. It looks like the Democrats are going to be sneakily activating. And don't you love words like that? Young people to register other people to vote. In a totally nonpartisan fashion, I'm sure.
Under the Federal Work Study program, now allows students to get paid through Federal Work Study to register people and to be nonpartisan poll workers. As we know, this is important for a number of reasons. One, to engage our young leaders in this process and activate them in terms of their ability to strengthen our community.
Sorry, but this is an absolute scam. This is the same old community organizing business that was run by Barack Obama and which got America into the partisan divided mess it is in now. Do not believe a word you hear when they say that this is nonpartisan, because when they use phrases like activate and our communities, that is Democrat speak for making sure the fix is in. John Fund after the break. Welcome back. Let's bring in a great friend of the show, political journalist John Fund. Now, John, if you thought the left couldn't get any wackier, Biden's doctor has declared him fit for duty, saying that they've identified no new concerns, and I suspect that word new is an important one, after a physical exam on Wednesday. Tell us about this.
Well, this is a rerun of last year where the White House physician, who of course owes his job to Barack Obama's patronage, declared the president just fine and had to admit, however, that he did not conduct any cognitive tests of the president. This year they added, because of course it was not necessary at all, despite the Hur report, which took place weeks ago, which found him to be an elderly man with a very bad memory. And of course, the doctor did not avail himself of the opportunity to answer any questions from reporters. The statement that he makes, as brief as it is, speaks for itself. And no one can challenge it. No one can question him.
Well, but some people now are starting to try and spin the whole story. Gavin Newsom says that his age, Joe Biden's age, isn't a concern. No. It's actually an asset. Have a look at this.
It's because of his age that he's been so successful. It's because of the wisdom and the character that's developed over years that we have the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Bill, and the PACT Act, and the Safer Communities Act.
John Fund, do you think people are really buying this when they look at Joe Biden's performance in speeches and things such as the crisis at the southern border and the crises in the Middle East and all sorts of other things that seem to have spun out of control on his watch?
Oh, James, remember in Shakespeare, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. What Newsom is doing is very clever. He's, of course, reminding people of Biden's age. And then in a clip you didn't show, he says, well, of course Biden will debate Donald Trump. He'll mop the floor with him. I can guarantee the president is going to be debating Donald Trump. Well, no one else in the Biden campaign thinks that Joe Biden can debate Donald Trump, and they'll find some excuse that they can't debate someone who wants to destroy democracy. So what Newsom is saying, if you had subtitles, is, I know that Biden is completely gaga. I'm basically overpraising him in order to make it appear as if I'm supporting him. But in the end, I want the job. Where do I sign up?
Well, I think, John, that Donald Trump has dialed in on exactly what you're saying here, because he has given Gavin Newsom a nickname. And, he only does this when he thinks somebody is a target that he wants to take out. Let's have a look at this from a few hours ago.
Governor Newsom from California, isn't that his name, Newsom?
Governor Newsom, what do you reckon?
Well, I think that pretty soon there'll be jokes about Newsom's Brill cream haircut and everything else. That's coming. I suspect that Gretchen Whitmer, the Cruella de Vil of Michigan, will come in for some ribbing. I think Donald Trump is on record saying he doesn't think Joe Biden will be his opponent. So he's softening up the potential successors to Biden already.
Yeah, and, I thought that this, too, was really interesting here, just on Joe Biden's fitness. Have a look at what Karine Jean-Pierre had to say when she was asked about this the other day.
The president has a team of doctors that is with him 24/7, and he is able to do the work.
And she went on to say that these doctors essentially give him a cognitive test every day, one that he might not even know about. Are we not supposed to worry about this?
Well, again, who do the doctors work for? They work for the President of the United States. They are appointed by the President of the United States. Their job will continue if Biden is reelected. If he's not reelected, their job goes away, and all those cushy times working at the White House and all of the prestige and everything goes away. What is their incentive to give him a cognitive test that he might fail? Zero.
Follow the money. That's always the word in politics, isn't it? And speaking of that, just on another story, it does seem that some green billionaires are pouring money into campaigns to persuade Hollywood writers to catastrophize the climate in film and television clips. I've always sort of suspected this, but you've got new evidence. Tell us about it.
Well, there's a group in Los Angeles that's held 5 annual conventions very quietly. It's financed by the Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's financed by the Sierra Club. And what they do is they bring together writers and producers and executives to try to figure out how to insert climate change catastrophizing into scripts. Their goal in the next few years is that 50% of all films and television plays in Hollywood will include a climate theme. For example, how in the world does someone incorporate an all plant-based diet into his meal plan as part of a sitcom? I mean, it's just bizarre. But this is subtle imagery and subtle product placement, I would call it, if you want to call an ideology product placement, which is trying to warp the young minds of young people and get everyone to think, well, everyone's on board and all the celebrities are on board. The one problem with this, James, is this: Hollywood celebrities are notorious for an excessive, carbon-rich lifestyle, including flying private jets everywhere. But this group has a response. They quote a leading climate change activist who says, "Hypocrisy is the price we pay for entering into this crusade."
Oh, John Fund, you can't make it up. John Fund, thank you so much for your time. Now, we'll be back in a moment with a very special Italian edition of Only in America. But first, while we're on the subject of multiculturalism, just what is going on here? Nothing to worry about, just footage that has emerged of New York's Chuck Schumer, who also by coincidence leads the Democratic majority in the Senate, waving the flag of Communist China, America's great rival, at a Lunar New Year celebration in Manhattan. Of course, Lunar New Year was celebrated for thousands of years before the communists took over China, and may it be celebrated for thousands of years after they're gone. Gung Hei Fat Choice, Senator. Only in America, next. Hey, benvenuti a tutti. You're watching the U.S. Report, and now it's time for a special Italian-style edition of Only in America.
Tuo palo americano.
Now, you may have noticed that many American comedians are still shying away from making fun of Joe Biden because, well, they want to get work in a Democrat-dominated Hollywood. Italians, they don't have that problem. Have a look at this Italian sketch comedy show that's been doing a better job poking fun at Biden than most American TV shows.
Buonasera, Presidente Biden. Presidente.
Good evening, Mr. President Biden. President. Here we are, President Biden. Qui.
Here?
Yes.
I forgot to take the pills.
No, ma non sono le pillole, non sono le
I
medicine.
called the nurse.
No.
And this has become a regular skit on this show because a few days later, they had another show. Look at this.
Buonasera, Presidente Biden. Oh, Presidente Biden. Mr. President. It's okay?
Are you okay, President? It's okay.
Ok, tutto a posto. Welcome, benvenuto. No, di nuovo, mamma mia. Mr. President, ecco.
Are you okay? Yeah.
Ok, it's okay.
Yeah, very good. What's your name?
Con chi parla? Mr. President.
My name is Joe Kennedy.
No, Biden, lei è Biden. È Biden.
Mamma mia, the president's going to need an extra scoop of gelato if he hears about this one. That's all the time we have for this week. Until next time, ciao for now and bye-bye.